So, Nate, let's start with you in 90 seconds or less. What's your take on what's going on with international stocks in 2025?
Already, I guess start the clock, right? 90 seconds. It might be a complex topic, but I think we have a pretty straightforward answer. When I look at what's happening this year, I think non-US stocks are doing well because of the weaker dollar. You know, uh, the major dollar index, which is the DXY, is the ticker for it. But again, you can't invest in the index. It's just how you can Google it. Is made up of six global currencies, the euro, the yen, the pound, the Canadian dollar. Well, that dollar index is down 9.9% year to date. Means across the globe, the dollar is underperforming other currencies. And economically, academically, when you have a weaker dollar, it has the potential to reduce the earnings for foreign companies that have a high percentage of US sales, but also US companies that have a large portion of foreign sales that they're collecting. And when you look at the S&P 500, companies inside that index generate over 40% of their revenue outside of the US. So as the dollar has become weaker, those sales that they're generating overseas have just come down. While countries that are generating revenue internally or in their domestic economy, Germany companies raising money in Germany, Japanese companies in Japan, they don't have to deal with that currency volatility. I think that's been a big driver to why you're seeing some of that international stocks outperforming the US.
Interesting. Aaron, do you have some devil's advocate, agreement, rebuttal? Where are you with that explanation and or your own?
I think that's a very valid explanation. I think that suffices for why, but I'm going to take a little bit of a different take here. So, Nate, you covered the why, but I'm going to ask the question, so what? When you look at US stocks versus international stocks, and I look at this, and many people do, on a relative basis. So if you put the price of US based stocks, actually, since we're talking about international, if you put the price of international based stocks in a simple fraction, international stocks go in your numerator, US stocks go in your denominator. You put the price of whatever your ETFs or indices are right there. It doesn't matter what that number is. What you're tracking, though, is to see the relationship of that number over time. And we call that a relative strength line. Well, if you look at that relative strength line going back over the last 5, 10, really 20 years since we exited the great financial crisis, that line has been basically a straight line down, do it for the camera here, down. Um, and we've seen some fits and starts along the way. So when that number is trending down, it doesn't necessarily mean that international stocks are going down. It means they are performing less than US stocks. And we've definitely seen some fits and starts along the way. My take on this is great. We've seen some international outperformance year to date, but really a lot of that international performance, when you look at the relative strength line, has come back since April. So I'm going to want to see a more pronounced uptrend in international stocks versus US before I start really pounding the table for international. I think, Nate, your explanation for a weaker US dollar, I think that's a great explainer why. But I think in addition to asking just the why, I think we should be asking, so what? And Nate, you already covered the international revenue aspect of S&P 500 companies. 40% of S&P revenues come overseas. So if you're looking for international exposure, you could argue you already get it with S&P 500 type companies. And the last thing I'll say is I think if you're going to invest in international, I think there's a bit more of a proactive way of investing in international stocks. I think people are going to see international outperforming US and they're going to be very reactive about it. I would challenge people to be more proactive versus reactive as they invest in international stocks.